Hi everyone, my name is Becky Robinson and I'm here with my good friend Whitney Johnson for a very special webinar during a very special week. For those of you who might have missed the big news, this is the week that Whitney's brand new book, Disrupt Yourself, is launching. And we are holding this event today in part to celebrate the launch of Whitney's amazing new book. And you might see that I have her book covers on the wall behind me. I absolutely adore this book and I'm so happy to be on camera and say it live during Whitney's launch week. We are really looking forward to learning with you today. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
So I have a few things as we begin today's event. The first one is that quite often those of you who attend our events want to know if you're going to have a chance to get the slides. So we will send a PDF selection of some of today's slides after the event along with a link to the recording. So in the event that you have friends, colleagues, neighbors, followers, fans, or others who would benefit from this content, we encourage you to share this with them today. And if you're going to share with them the link, you might want to just buy them a copy of Whitney's book. And you can even do that now if you want. I won't be upset. The other thing that you might need to know is that we will be open for some Q&A throughout the event. We want to invite you to use the question panel, and I'll be sharing some of those along the way with Whitney. So if you have any questions today, please feel free to be putting those in, and any comments or cheers or anything else, I'll be happy to share those as well. We also invite you to live tweet today's event, and if you choose to live tweet, please include Whitney's Twitter handle @JohnsonWhitney. It's in the chat panel, and please use the hashtag #DisruptYourself so you can see all the conversation about this book and topic. So as we jump in today, we do have a chat question up on the screen because today's topic is play to your distinctive strengths, which is one of the 7 strategies that Whitney has in her book for disrupting yourself. So we would love to hear your thoughts and opinions about this question of what is the difference between a strength and a distinctive strength. And I have a couple of ideas here already. Diane says, Whitney, that a distinctive strength sets you apart from the rest. Laurel says a distinctive strength must be one that is unique to you to the point that you are complimented upon its use in your life. And John says distinctive strengths probably. I'm going to strike that probably. What do you think, Whitney?
Yeah, I like how he's hedging his bets. That's good.
And Paula, who I know is a super fan of yours, says that she thinks distinctive strengths carry with them a bit more of our personal passions.
Interesting.
So thanks. Comments. Laurel is wondering who the BYU alumni is. That BYU alumni on today's call is Whitney Johnson. And I did not share any bio. I think that, Whitney, I've known you for so long that I kind of forgot about the fact that I usually do a formal introduction. I sort of feel like you might not need an introduction. Whitney is obviously an amazing author. Her first book was Dare, Dream, Do. And she has a tremendous work history, including being like one of the most big-time analysts in the financial world. I think, what did they used to call you, Whitney?
Oh, so I was institutional investor ranked. So in the on Wall Street, covering.
And what was that nickname that they called you? Was it Queen Whitney?
No, La Whitney.
La Whitney. I remember now. Whitney's also a mother of 2 kids and a wife and just an amazing friend. And so it's hard because I know you so well, Whitney, but I just could not be more thrilled to support this event today. One more comment on distinctive strengths, and then we're going to let you take this over, and I'll shut off my camera.
Okay.
So Harvey says a distinctive strength is a strength that people recognize and defines who you are.
Okay.
So thanks for those comments. We look forward to more.
Fantastic. All right. So thank you very much for your input. I really appreciate that. And I love how some of you had some interesting nuances that I hadn't thought of. So I hope that you'll hang on to those and we can potentially revisit those in a couple of minutes. So let me screen forward, which I can't seem to do. Let's see. What do I need to do? Oh, here. Try this. Here we go. Okay. All right. So let me start here. In the last seminar, what we did is we talked about this idea of disruptive innovation. And as you may remember, my background, as Becky hinted, is that I worked on Wall Street. And at one point while working on Wall Street, I came across the framework of disruptive innovation. And one of the reasons it was so helpful to me is it helped me understand why repeatedly we saw wireless forecasts for wireless telephony outstripping my estimates and certainly trouncing wireline telephony. And so as I looked at these frameworks, I became found them very compelling in helping me understand what was happening in Mexico. But the more closely I looked at them, I began to think, you know what, these frameworks actually also apply to individuals. And so what I'd like to do is just quickly recap what disruptive innovation is. It is a low-end or new market innovation that eventually upends an industry. So like Amazon eventually upended Barnes & Noble and Borders. It put Borders out of business. And we now see Uber upending the taxi industry. And so that's what disruptive innovation is. And we typically apply that to products and services and companies and countries. Well, what I have really begun to talk about and think about is personal disruption. And personal disruption is the act of taking disruptive innovation and applying it to an individual and being willing to start at the low end, climb to the top, and then upend your career. Now, what I've done now is I've taken disruption and said, all right, I want to take the S-curve that we typically use to help us gauge how quickly an innovation will be adopted, and let's apply it to personal disruption. And the S-curve is important because it gives us milestones that we can watch for as we're working on moving up a new learning curve. So what you'll see at the low end of the curve, you typically have growth is fairly slow. And so knowing that that growth is going to be slow, whether you're starting a new job or you're starting a business or you've just started college, if you know that growth is going to be slow, then it helps you avoid discouragement. And typically around 10% into it, maybe 6 months into your job, a first semester into college, you start to gain momentum and you have increasing competence and you have confidence, and that allows you to move into hypergrowth. At this point, you do a little bit and you see a lot of results, and that's really the exciting part of the curve where all of your synapses are firing and you feel tremendously confident. And then at the top of the curve, you can do everything very, very well. You feel very competent, you feel capable, but you can almost do it too well. You're not learning anymore, and so you can start to become bored. And at this point, if you don't jump to a new curve or aren't allowed to jump, your plateau can become a precipice. There are 7 variables that help you. Actually, before I go to the 7 variables, what's important about the frameworks of disruption is that they help improve the odds of success. So according to the disruption theory, when you pursue a disruptive course, your odds of success are 6 times higher and your revenue opportunity 20 times greater when you pursue a disruptive path. Now,
hey, Whitney?
Yes?
I am so sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing your slides move.
You're not?
So,
well, I'm seeing them move. So why don't you move them? Why don't you move them for me?
Okay, we'll take over. No problem.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's kind of boring just listening to me talk. Do you want to go back really quickly and let people see them?
But we will make sure that we get those slides moving.
So why don't you go back?
It's just going to take a second.
Okay.
If you, I'm going to invite Kayla, who's our tech support, on the line to share her screen when she's ready. She has the slides.
Okay, great.
And in the meantime, I did have some more comments coming in, and how about I share those?
Oh, please do while we're waiting to get this up and running.
Okay, super. Melanie is wondering if you can repeat the percentages of gains by disruption.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So those percentages that I'm talking about are referring to the research that was done on the disk drive industry by Clayton Christensen, and you can see a lot of detail in the Innovator's Dilemma, and then I recapped it briefly in my book, Disrupt Yourself. And what he found is that when you go into a new, you create an industry and or you're willing to go at the low end, your odds of success are 6 times higher. So you may still fail because the odds go from 6%, which is basically really low, to 36%. And then the revenue opportunity in this particular analysis was 20 times greater than if you decided to go into a market or try something new where there was already a competitor or an established player. And so, the theory is interesting, but it's especially important because it's robust and it indicates that in fact, if you if you follow this framework, if you apply this theory, you will increase your odds of being successful.
Super. So we now do have the S-curve slide up, Whitney, and if you want to help us to know when
Okay.
you want to move on to new slides, we have the slides now. So thanks
Okay.
for that.
Okay, so which slide are you on? Just the one with the virtuous cycle and the mastery?
Correct.
Okay, so let me just recap that really quickly. So what I said is at the low end of the curve, you are looking at, you're going to be working really, really hard, and it will seem like you're not accomplishing much because you're building up momentum in the system. And so when you're at the low end, you might feel discouraged, but don't get discouraged because eventually you're going to move into hypergrowth if you're applying yourself deliberately. Once you're in that hypergrowth, you're feeling very competent, which means you feel confident, and then at the high end of the curve, it's very easy to do everything, but your growth's going to slow down and you might actually get bored, at which point it's important to jump to a new curve. All right, now you can go to the next slide. All right, as I said, and I just recapped for this a moment ago for you, Melanie, is that the odds of success improve when you pursue a disruptive course. And if you now go to the next slide, what I've done in my book is I've identified 7 variables that will allow you to move up this curve more quickly, from taking the right risks to being discovery-driven. In our last webinar that we had about 2 months ago, which you can certainly go back and listen to a recording of, we polled people at the very end. We said, okay, first of all, where do you think you all are on the curve, which was interesting. There was kind of an interesting mix of people mostly feeling like they were at the bottom or at the top of the curve. But then we also asked the question, which of these variables would you like to drill down on in a subsequent webinar? And the answer and response was, we'd like to learn more about playing to your distinctive strengths. So this webinar today, we're really going to focus on strengths. What I want to do on the strengths is 2 things. First of all, I want to focus on how do you identify what your strengths are. And once we've gone through a few exercises on identifying your strengths, then we'll help and think through how do you play to your distinctive strengths and what that might look like. So the trouble with strengths is that because you tend to do them reflexively well, they're very easy to overlook. And so one of the questions I'd like to ask you and have you think about to identify your strengths is, what skills do you have that have actually helped you survive in your life? And a story that I think is really, really compelling and illustrates this idea very clearly is one of a very good friend of mine, Scott Ettinger. We're both contributors at HBR, and as I've come to know him, he has a real superpower, but I'm going to tell you what the superpower is in just a minute. So Scott grew up in Florida. He grew up basically in a trailer. His family was very poor. His parents couldn't take care of them. He ended up being taken care of by an aunt who eventually became his mother, or adopted mother. For Scott, survival meant that he had to be able to persuade others and to get buy-in for his ideas at a very early age, because there wasn't someone who was automatically just going to take care of him, as most kids can have come to expect and can rely on. Well, this skill that he developed of raw persuasion, of being able to get buy-in for his ideas, eventually allowed him to become a debate champion in college and obtain scholarships for that. And today he is a supremely good salesperson. He has been able to be a top-ranked salesperson at Fortune 500 companies. He now advises companies and CEOs. I call him the CEO sales whisperer because he's just so very good at it and so very natural. And so this skill that helped him survive as a child is now something that helps him really thrive professionally. And so what I'd love to have you do is think about what skills have helped you survive, those skills that you sort of wish you didn't have to develop that you did, and as a consequence, it's quite likely that has become one of your strengths. Okay, so let's go to the next one. What makes you feel strong? I touched on this one last time. This comes from Marcus Buckingham, where he explains that our strengths clamor for our attention in the most basic way. Using them makes you feel strong. You feel invigorated, inquisitive, successful. And if you will reflect on what you get done in the course of a day, you typically will look back at the things that you felt good about, you felt strong when you were doing them. That's likely one of your strengths. Now, a great example of this particular one is that the strengths, what makes you feel strong, can come in lots of different packages. Erin Newkirk, who's the founder of a company called Red Stamp, what makes her feel strong is sending notes and cards to loved ones. Seems like something very simple. Well, she turned that strength, she leveraged that strength, and she leveraged iOS technology to develop an app that makes it very easy for people to be thoughtful on the go. And so Red Stamp, and if you know me, you've probably gotten a Red Stamp card from me at one point or another, allows people to very quickly, within 5 or 10 seconds, send people this lovely little note card over their phone to let people know that they're thinking of them. And so this is what makes her feel strong, and by leveraging that, she's built a business where Red Stamp is a top app in iTunes stores around the world. So again, think about what makes you feel strong in the course of a day. The next one is, what is your go-to activity to feel in control? And I kind of stumbled on this not too long ago, because I found myself feeling overwhelmed, as I often do, and perhaps you do as well. And I found myself thinking, if I could just sit down, sit at my computer, and send a few emails to people and connect with them, all would be well in the world again. And I realized that that impulse to want to do that was one of my strengths. Well, not everyone wants to do that. If you start polling people, I found one of my friends, Bettina Hine at Pixability, she tells me that what makes her feel strong is being able to delve into spreadsheets. I know I was at a seminar a few weeks ago, and I had a gentleman say spreadsheets also make him feel strong. They make him feel in control again. So when you think about what your go-to activity is, and not the thing that you do to self-sabotage, and we all have those go-to activities, but I'm talking about the go-to activity that makes you feel in control, that does not involve any sort of self-sabotage, that is very likely a strength, because that strength makes you feel strong, and when you feel strong, you feel in control. All right, what exasperates you? The frustration of genius. So there was a commenter on one of my HBR blogs who said, her name was Alana, who said, the frustration of genius is believing that if it's easy for you, it must be easy for everyone else. And so one of the things I want you to think about is, when do you feel exasperated? And it's interesting, I had thought of this in the context of very sort of simple things like, I'm exasperated because I spell well, but perhaps someone around me doesn't. And so I thought, well, maybe they're not as smart as me, until I was around someone who is really good at having a sense of direction, and I'm actually a contrary indicator when it comes to direction, because I always go the wrong way. So they'd get exasperated with me, but think about those things that exasperate you. But what I would say here is, the other day I got very exasperated with someone that I was working with, and as I tried to peel back what was going on, it wasn't necessarily the area of expertise per se of the job or task that needed to get done. I realized that I was exasperated because the person hadn't anticipated what I needed done without me telling them. Like, I expected them to read my mind. Well, the reason that I was exasperated is, it turns out that I am kind of, sometimes sort of, a pretty good mind reader, which is what makes me a very good accompanist on the piano. So when you're thinking about what exasperates you, I mean, by the way, we apologize and it was all good, but it was a really important insight for me. And so I would encourage you, as you think about what exasperates you, don't look at the surface of what exasperates you, peel back the layers, ask why, and maybe why again, and you're very likely to come up with what one of your superpowers is, because in the right circumstances, my being able to anticipate someone's needs, like as an accompanist on the piano, that's a strength. All right, let's keep going. What made you an oddball as a child? I love the story of Candace Brown Elliott. So as a child, people called her Encyclopedia Brown. She was super smart. She was never paying attention in class. All of her friends or her classmates thought she was smart. Her teachers were incredibly frustrated. She didn't try. She was an underachiever, etc., etc., etc. Well, today, as an adult, she has over 80 U.S. patents. She has a company that was backed by venture capitalists, which she eventually sold to Samsung. So think about that thing that when you were a child made you odd, that made you stick out, that made you even feel uncomfortable. It's quite likely that odd thing is what sets you apart, and is in fact now something that can serve as a strength and allow you to play to your distinctive strengths and move up the curve more quickly. All right, we've just got one more of these before we go on to distinctive strengths. So what do other people say you do well? And what I want to do here actually is I want to go to this next slide, and I want to have you raise your hands and look at your #1 skill on LinkedIn. Take a minute, don't go too long, but are you surprised by that? Are you surprised by that actual skill? I know I was. I had my top skill on LinkedIn is strategy. Well, I've never thought of myself as a strategist. It turns out a lot of people think I'm pretty good at strategy. And so if you go back to the slide again, what do other people say you do well? Look at your LinkedIn profile. Look at what compliments you get from people that you brush off. And you brush them off, sometimes you're perhaps being coy, but it might be that because this thing for you is as natural as the air that you breathe, in fact, it's one of your strengths. And a great example of this is a fellow by the name of Neil Robinson. He has worked in the gaming industry for several decades. He taught himself how to code. He's been a liaison with the developer community, worked, built lots and, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in books of business. Well, there's one superpower that's actually not on his resume, and that is that he is a tremendously good public speaker. And one of the reasons he is such a good liaison with the developer community is that he's able to translate his ideas. So you want to really look at, what do people say you do well? What compliments do you habitually dismiss? Look at your #1 skill on LinkedIn. Are you surprised? And if you dismiss those compliments, again, it's quite likely that that is one of your strengths. And as I said in our last webinar, but I will say it again because I think it's really important and I really want to reinforce this, it is quite likely that your superpowers are not on your resume because you overlooked them. So I'm on that slide. I'm going to stop there for a second. Do we have any questions that people want to pose before I move on to how do we figure out what our distinctive strengths are? And I can't see the screen, so Becky, I'll need you to just prompt me.
Sure. I am looking, and I'm definitely open to some questions coming in. I did have a couple of people comment that they were not surprised by their top skill on LinkedIn. So,
okay, good.
And I'm hoping that some folks will share their questions. I know for me, Whitney, sometimes that habit of dismissing compliments is so ingrained that when you ask me to think about what it is that people say I do well, I have a hard time thinking of what that might be. But I would also love to hear from you. How is it that you didn't know that you're a great strategist?
I don't know. I mean, it's just because I've never had a job that described me as a strategist. I mean, it's never been on my resume. It's never been in my job description. And so it just never occurred to me that other people would think that I'm good at thinking about strategy. So that's why it's really helpful to find out what other people think you do well, and also, again, to listen really hard to those compliments, because the other reason that we sometimes dismiss those compliments is that we didn't have to work hard for them, and so we don't value them. Malcolm Forbes said people tend to undervalue what they are and overvalue what they aren't. And so it's quite likely that you get frustrated because people aren't complimenting you on the thing that you worked really hard to learn how to do, which is important to know how to do it because it's probably a pay-to-play skill and it gives you the open door that you want to move through in your career. But it's your strength that is a natural that you just do as if you were breathing that's likely going to propel you really to the top of your career in whatever field you're in.
Got it. A couple questions here, Whitney. Laurel is wondering if a distinctive strength can be an annoyance to others. So she mentions that she edits written text well, but helping others with their writing sometimes seems to upset them.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it could be. That's a really great question. And again, I suspect what happens here, the disconnect is, so they write, she edits, and then she hands it back to them. Because for her, it's so easy to edit, it's kind of like, oh, I just breathed, and now I've edited this document, I'm going to hand it back to you. And here you go, aren't you happy? Here's a gift that I've just given to you. And because it was so easy, it's not a big deal. Not recognizing that for that other person, they actually worked really hard to put that together, and they feel somewhat vulnerable but because it was so easy for you, you can't even comprehend why they might feel vulnerable around that. And so one of the things that can happen, or the ways that we can manage that, is that when we're playing to our strengths, recognize again that people are bumping up against our brilliance, and so this is a time where we've really got to pull on our emotional intelligence, our EQ, and recognize and acknowledge what they've done well, and be very precise in our feedback of what's working, how you changed it, why you changed it, etc. And so by being aware that it's not as easy for them, we draw on our compassion and our social skills to make them feel valued and not lesser than because they don't happen to have the strength that you have.
Got it. That's very helpful. John is wondering, Whitney, how you avoid stacking the deck with regards to strengths noted by others.
So, well, why wouldn't you want to stack the deck? And if I'm not understanding the question, right? I mean, so help me understand. Maybe John asked the question again, because I think, of course, you want to play to your strengths, so I think I'm probably not understanding what you're asking.
Sure. He did follow up, and maybe this is a comment on Laurel's question, but intentionally pushing a desired or self-perceived strength over others less obvious. So I guess is it possible, Whitney, that we might think that we have distinctive strengths and push those to the forefront, and maybe we're missing what our real strengths are?
Oh, okay, right, okay, I got it. So I'll give you an example that maybe might play to this. I remember a few years ago when I was working as an equity analyst, and I was getting my performance review, and I had people say over and over and over again, wow, Whitney is so good at, developing relationships with the clients and really, managing those relationships and communicating with them, et cetera, et cetera. And I was good at it, and I enjoyed doing it, and it made me feel strong. But I remember getting that performance review and being so frustrated that people did not comment on my modeling skills, that I built really good financial models. I was so frustrated and actually dejected that somehow people weren't taking me seriously. And so I think that, and because I had to work really hard at that, it didn't come as naturally. And so I think one of the things that can happen is that we can have that particular strength that we've worked hard for. We want other people to value it, and it's not that they don't value it, because the fact is that the mere fact that they're having the conversation with you, that they're listening to what you have to say, means that you're competent. It was your pay-to-play skill. But now that you've got that pay-to-play skill, that you're in the same room, you're seated at the same table, they're saying, but what really differentiates you is this other thing you don't value because it's so easy for you.
Got it. Lots and lots of new questions coming in the panel, Whitney.
Okay.
And I want to come back to one that Harvey has, because I think it's a really good question. But Diana's wondering, once you identify that you have a distinctive strength, how can you do something significant with it?
Okay, Diana, I want you to hold that question, because that really goes to the second part of the webinar, which is around our distinctive strengths, and I think that's where, once you identify your strength, because if you have a strength and 50 people around you have that same strength, it's much more difficult, and so that's where I want to get to this idea of distinctive strengths. So Becky, if there's another question or two on this, then let's take that, and then otherwise let's go to distinctive strengths and then circle back to Diana's.
Sure. So let me present Harvey's question. So
okay.
A frustration would be, you know your strengths, and you know that your strengths, so perhaps your strength is that you can spot the gaps in teams and look to fill them. So you fill the gaps, but then you end up being frustrated because you're not really working in the area that you want to. And so the question is, how do you overcome or deal with those situations on a team where, maybe your strength is you can see the gaps and fill them, but that's not really what you're best at?
No. So where I would push back is, okay, so one of a strength is to be able to see a gap and then jump in and fill that. The first question I would ask you is, when you say that's not really what you're good at, but you're just doing it naturally, I would actually push back a little and say, are you sure that that's not what you're really good at, or is it just that you don't want to be known for that? Because sometimes we have things that we're really good at and we don't want to be known for because we somehow perceive it as lesser And so I don't know. I would have to have more information, Harvey, but I would say, sorry, whenever I hear Harvey, I think of Suits. I hope you watch the show Suits because it's a fantastic show. Okay, slight digression. But I think I would really push back for you there and say to you, are you sure that that's not something that you do really well? And maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. So, but I would ask the question, is it possible that it's something you do well, and you're just not quite ready to sort of own that that's something that you do well because you perceive it as not being as sexy somehow.
Got it. And if there's any clarification, I'm happy to share that, Harvey. Harvey says he thinks it puts you into this position of being a jack of all trades rather than a master of something. So maybe the resistance is in really wanting to be the master of something rather than just a role player who can fill any spot. A comment I want to share from Jane. Jane says that as you were sharing your story about your own experience with your performance review, it was an interesting twist on how masculine and feminine attributes are recognized in the workplace.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I appreciate that. I'm trying not to see the world through the gender lens continually, but I do think that that's absolutely true when you think about the masculine traits of power and achieving and the feminine traits of nurturing and relatedness. We all know that we need soft skills, but it's the masculine or hard skills that tend to get valued, and so there's this constant tug of war between the two of knowing that you're going to get paid for the hard skills, but knowing that without the soft skills, you can't actually get anything done. I want to answer Harvey's question, and then we'll move forward. So, Harvey, I understand the tension there. I think you're absolutely right that it is important to have a domain expertise because it's the domain expertise that legitimizes us. Again, domain expertise is kind of a hard skill, and the soft skill is, so there's a tension there. What I would say to you is knowing that you have those soft skills, that you can jump in and fill gaps, I would use the strength of those soft skills to leverage your way into being able to have the expertise roles that you're seeking after because you know that those will bode well for your career over the longer term.
Super.
Okay, go forward.
I'm going to hide my camera so that you can get back to the content.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so let's go to the next slide, to the fish out of water slide. Okay, so this idea of distinctive strengths, so we've just I've given you some examples of how to figure out what your strengths are, and those I think are actually harder to figure out than it is to figure out what your distinctive strengths are, because your distinctive strengths are something that make you somewhat of a fish out of water, like we talked about with Candace Brown Elliott. So one story that I'd love to share with you, and I actually wrote a little bit about it in the Harvard Business Review today, is that of Janie Juban. So Janie went to law school, and she's a lawyer at a law firm in Cleveland. And early on, probably when she was like a second or third year associate, she decided to start using social media and started reaching out to people on Twitter, et cetera. And this is around 2000, actually about 7 or 8 years ago, so a while ago. And so she starts playing around on social media, kind of having a lot of the lawyers looking at her like, what are you doing? I don't see the value of this. Like, this doesn't make sense. We're a conservative profession. This isn't how we get clients. Well, it turns out that social media was the way that Janie got clients, because she landed her first client, a client over Twitter. And she started to have newspaper and media outlets interviewing her about the legal profession's use of Twitter. And then when they went through a recession in 2008, where we had this huge downturn, lots of other associates were getting laid off, she didn't get laid off. And then she made partner very, very early. So one could actually argue that Twitter or social media became a distinctive strength for her. She was a fish out of water. She was still a very good lawyer, but this fish out of water piece that she did of Twitter and being good on social media and very collegial in the online world has become a distinctive strength for her, and she is now a very high performer in terms of billing at her law firm. So that's one example of a distinctive strength. Another example, if you go to the next slide, is a fellow by the name of Horace Dediu. If any of you follow Apple and you follow the projections and the financial analysis around that, you've probably heard of him. He runs a blog called, or his Twitter handle is Asimco. Well, Horace has always loved smartphones. He's always loved technology. Early on, he really thought that it was going to be the phones that disrupted the computers. He went to work for Nokia. He started to discover that, in fact, it was the computing world that was disrupting the phones, and he eventually then left Nokia, and he went from being being at the disrupted to analyzing the disruptor, Apple. And so having had that really unique vantage point of being an engineer initially, of being in the telecom sector, taking those analytical chops, he is now one of the foremost analysts on Apple, and really is over and over again spot on with his predictions and his forecasts for that company. So this is another example of a distinctive strength. So in the case of Horace and as well as Janie, they sort of chose to, they were aware of what set them apart, and they started to play to it. Sometimes, though, we're just sort of forced into that, and again, desperation and disruption tend to be closer than we think. And this is the case with the next story that I want to tell you. A fellow I actually met on a plane about a year ago. Sometimes it does pay to talk to people on the planes. His name is Lieutenant Joe Duck Duck Geisman. And he studied neuroscience in college and really, really wanted to go into academia and study neuroscience. But again, recession, and he could not find anyone to hire him. He just could not get a job. And so he started looking at a number of different alternatives. He tried to, see if he could get Google to hire him to do algorithms. He tried to, get the gaming industry to hire him. All these doors were closed. He applies to the military because his mother was in the military. Well, it turns out that Lieutenant Geisman, they had need for neuroscience scientists, and in fact, he had to get a pay-to-play skill of learning how to fly a plane. And so now what he does is he analyzes he looks at the design of cockpits for maximum utility. And so he's able to bring his neuroscience background. He has this pay-to-play skill of learning how to fly, and this all came about because he was somewhat desperate. He needed a job, but it's become a really interesting, distinctive strength for him. And so my next question for you, if you go to the next slide, is you're trying to figure out what your distinctive strengths are, is what are your duck out of water stories? Where, if you think of, and are there situations where you've been put in either because you chose to go there like Janie did, and to a lesser extent Horace, or because you sort of were pressed into being a duck out of water, but it's turned out to really be a career maker for you, or it could become a career maker for you. And I'd love to hear if people have any stories that they'd like to share, or any clarifications that they'd like us to make.
Sure, and I'll wait for those to come in while people think about their duck out of water stories. There is a comment that came in from Catherine before related to top strengths being visible to others and important. So Catherine mentions that in her prior role, some strengths floated to the top on LinkedIn, and when she changed roles, she wanted to hide those, not understanding that they would disappear completely. And one of the things she's noticed is that the strengths for her new role have bubbled up to the top on LinkedIn, and those prior top strengths have shown up again in a more secondary or tertiary way. So I thought that was an interesting comment.
It is, and I think Catherine, it goes to this idea of sometimes our strengths are brought out depending on the circumstance that we're in, and so so depending on which pond you jump into, different strengths are going to get highlighted. That's an interesting observation. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. So Diane says she's, as it relates to being a duck out of water, a compulsive proofreader in a text speak world. Sorry, that was a hard phrase to say.
Interesting. Okay, so what is that? I'd love to hear what are the implications of that? How can that be of help to you, or how have you noticed that that's been of help to you?
And I'll look for that answer. And in the meantime, I do have a question that came in from Mike. It's not exactly a duck out of water story, but Mike from London, who has really appreciated being connected to you on LinkedIn and learning from your blogs, has the question, can your distinctive strength be latent? And if so, can it be nurtured and improved?
Absolutely. I think it can definitely be latent. I think, I think if people know what their strengths are, and certainly what their distinctive strengths are, when they're very young, they're highly unusual. And There's a wonderful quote by David Brooks of the New York Times that said, you know, most people don't find a calling, that their calling finds us, and then gradually we find ourselves. And so I think sometimes, again, back to this comment that was made just a moment ago, Catherine, we get put into a situation and the strengths start to come out. And I certainly think that they can be latent. I mean, I think there's some things now that I consider myself to do really, really surprisingly well that I would never have known or would have anyone would have identified about me in my youth. And so so that's why you want to listen to the compliments that you get as time goes by and as you change environments, whether you move to a new city or change jobs. Just be aware of what different strengths of yours might start to bubble up in that new context.
Great, thanks, Whitney. We have a story here from Christelle, a duck out of water story. So took an outside sales position but had no desire to sell, and then took over management of scheduling. Wow, we have some long stories coming in. Took over management of scheduling and statistics from a manager who didn't like paperwork, and now has moved into being the manager of a marketing analytics for the company. So
love it.
Yeah, very.
Love it.
Yeah, that seems like a very discovery-driven story. So
yeah,
here's
discovery-driven. Yeah, love it.
So here's one from Lynette, who's always been fascinated with personalities from the perspective of how to help people feel valued and loved. And she developed a technique as a mother as a result of failed systems of personalities that's been powerful. So now friends and family are pushing her to present the knowledge, and she's a duck out of water because she's been so long away from the stage and needs grants in order to support her research. And she's doing some training and getting her master's degree in horticulture. So all sorts of different
so now I'm curious how
So
I'm interested how the horticulture is going to inform the systems that she's put in place or you put in place in the context of your children and how that all comes together. One thing I would definitely encourage you to take a look at is iRelaunch, which is for, I mean, it sounds like maybe you're on-ramping, and I would take a look at that because that might be helpful to you in providing some tools as you're trying to jump back into the water. So very interesting. I'd love to hear more about how that all plays out.
Sure. And just to circle back to Diane, who had been talking about being a compulsive proofreader, she said she's still trying to figure out how that helps. She's become the go-to person whenever a colleague needs the assurance that a document that they prepare is presentable.
Well, she just answered her own question. She just answered her own question. So basically, in a world where people have become really comfortable with sort of slapdash communications, and forgive my typos that we write on our iPhone, and we think it's actually perfectly acceptable to have typos now because we're in a rush, it means that there are situations we all know, and we've all done it, where we've sent off a very important email or letter and realized only too late that there's a typo, and we look unprofessional. And so her eye for that and her willingness to look for that, I think, is a duck out of water, and it's making you valuable. So the question I would ask for you now is, how do you figure out a way to leverage that so that it makes you even more valuable as opposed to sort of this thing you do on the side?
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Any more? Shall we keep going?
I think we can keep going.
Okay. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to just give you a couple more examples of people that are playing to their distinctive strengths, in my opinion, and just curious to hear if you agree with me. So Susan Cain, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote a book called Quiet a few years ago in a world that can't stop talking, and it really sparked a revolution around introverts and half the population, where people think and act and behave very differently than extroverts, and figuring out how to actually make your way in a world that tends to, again, going back to this male-female, you know, soft, hard, extrovert, introvert skills. She has built an entire, like I said, revolution on really focused on introversion and what that means and what that looks like. And so here's a woman who realized that she was trained as a lawyer, and she realized that this was her strength, and instead of hiding from it and shying away from it, she is now playing to her distinctive strength of being an introvert. Another person, if you go to the next slide, is Pharrell Williams, because if any of you know me at all, you know I love reality TV, so I had to get a reality TV star in here somewhere. And Pharrell Williams, I think, is really playing to his distinctive strengths in one less obvious way, which is he really uses his connections and his gravitas in the world to get social good sorts of things done, which a lot of people may try their entire life to get social good initiatives launched and implemented, and they can't because they simply don't have the connections or the standing in order to do that. So I think that's one way, but I think a more obvious way for anybody who watches the show is when people are trying to decide, you know, which judge or mentor they want to go with. One of the distinctive strengths that Pharrell has is they all sing, so they've all been famous and accomplished as singers. He's a producer. And so he's able to have that distinctive strength of saying to someone, I can produce an album for you, I can produce a track for you. That becomes his distinctive strength, which as he plays to it, he's able to get talent that he might not otherwise be able to get in a very crowded field of incredibly talented people. So just to wrap up, one of the things I really want to emphasize for you as you think about jumping to this new learning curve and climbing this curve is that there are no shortage of jobs that people need to be done, and there are no shortage of problems to be solved, but there is only one of you. So it's really important to think about, okay, there are lots of problems that could be solved, but I need to figure out which problem I can solve, because of my distinctive strengths, the things that I do well that other people in this sphere simply do not. Because when you are willing to look for problems that need to be solved and then pair that with an unmet need, you are able to start to move and really gain momentum to move up a learning curve very, very quickly. And when you're moving up that curve quickly, you're confident and competent, and you're actually able to really make a difference and get a lot accomplished, and ideally a lot of good accomplished. Just as a closing remark, what I want to say here is that this idea of playing to your distinctive strengths, it's this notion where we talk about in disruption, it's important to play where others aren't playing, to figure out where the new market is, and as I said, the odds of success go up 6 times higher, the revenue opportunity 20 times greater. Well, the same happens for you, is that when you're willing to be a duck out of water, when you're willing to take your strengths to jump into a pool where other people don't do what you do well, you will most definitely find that there is as an ocean of opportunity waiting for you. So that concludes my prepared, I don't know if you can see me doing quotation marks, prepared remarks, if you will, and for the rest of the time I'm open to taking questions and hearing your stories and just getting your thoughts about what your strengths are and more importantly what your distinctive strengths are.
Thanks, Whitney. Sorry, I don't have the superpower of unmuting myself quickly. So I do have some questions coming, and here's one from Rita. So what if you were criticized for your strength, and now there's an embarrassment? So Rita says she's analytical, she needs to take her time to process, and she's been criticized for being slow.
Okay. Fair enough. So what I would say is that that is sometimes going to, there's two things, there's a both and going on here. So on the one hand, being analytical, I think, is a strength, and you do want to be in a work environment where that analytical ability is valued. And so it could be that you hired the wrong boss or hired the wrong company or hired the wrong job if you're in a place where your analytical chops cannot be fully brought to bear on the job. I would at the same time say it is possible sometimes that when we're really analytical, we veer from conscientious to perfectionism, and then the perfectionism holds us up. And so what I would say is, again, make sure that you find a place that values the analytical skills, and then just be aware of, do I sometimes allow my analysis to turn into paralysis because I'm somehow afraid to move forward and I'm letting perfectionism kick in as opposed to conscientiousness. And so so it's a both and I think only you can kind of weigh out the two. but my bottom line is that you do want to find places to work where your analytical skills can be on full display.
That's helpful, Whitney. Thanks. So we do have a question about the book in general, and I'll repeat it for those of you who might have missed the beginning. We are celebrating this week the launch of Whitney's second book, Disrupt Yourself. And earlier today, I did hear her mention the next book. So those of us who are big fans can anticipate that in a few years. But Priyanka would love to know what inspired you to write the book and what your experience was as you embarked on this one.
Oh, okay, great question. What inspired me to write the book? Well, it's kind of an open-ended question. Okay, I'll give you a very simple answer, and then I'll give you a longer answer. So the very simple answer is that I was doing a lot of, and I don't think this is what you're asking me, but I was doing a lot of speaking in organizations on disruption. And my speaker's agent would say to me, you need to have some type of leave behind, and I didn't have one, and she said, will you write a book already? So, I mean, she didn't say it like that. She's very polite. That's just me talking like that. So that was the catalyst for actually writing the book so that I would have a leave behind. But the real motivation for writing the book, and I think is really the question that you're asking, is that, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, when I first became aware of these frameworks of disruption and first realized that they could also apply to individuals and that there was this framework in place that could help us manage change more effectively when we're trying something new or when we do need to try something new, and that these frameworks allow us to go from being stuck to unstuck. I wanted to be able to codify this, and I knew that if I wrote about it, it would force me to think about it clearly and deeply and develop that domain expertise that we were talking about a moment ago. And by doing that, I would be able to think more clearly and talk about it more clearly, and by having this written word that I could put into someone's hands, then they could begin to have a conversation, their very own conversation with these ideas, with the goal and the hope and the dream, really, that we can always be moving forward, because that, to me, my greatest fear in life is to be stuck. And so if I'm able to be unstuck and these frameworks allow me to do it and you to do it, then I will have accomplished the why of writing this book.
Thanks so much. So here's a question back to the whole distinctive strengths topic. Your strength can also be your weakness. How do we balance this so the strength works for us and not against us?
Yeah, right. Yeah, in the vicinity of strength there is weakness, right? And so it's always it's important to be aware of that, because it's the strength that has probably been a protection for us and allowed us, going back to the story that I told at the very beginning, it's allowed us to thrive or excuse me, survive in perhaps a very difficult circumstance. And so I think one of the things that's important is to, as we consider that strength, is to say to ourselves, okay, what aspects of this strength are ones that will continue to serve me, but are there sort of, you know, byproducts, if you will, of using this strength that have developed over the years that were part of survival, but now it's time that I need to let them go. Let me see if I could come up with a good example. Okay, I have a good example. So, you know, I'm the oldest child in my family, and I think that sometimes oldest children tend to try to prove themselves, I think because we're trying to get our parents' approval, and maybe all children do this, but I did, certainly. And as a consequence, I am very driven and very ambitious, and I want to achieve, and I think that that is actually a very good trait. But I also know that in doing some of the research that I've done is that a desire to compete and to gain approval, if not paired with sociability and a willingness to get along and work with people and social skills, becomes a real deficit, because then it's you or me and sacrificing everybody else. And so it's really a matter of being able to say, okay, this has served me really well, but what are the barnacles? I need to get rid of those barnacles, and then start to bring in some other skills that I didn't feel like I could develop, but now I'm able to, and I have the seeds of those, and so I will.
That's very helpful. And just for the record, I'm the youngest child, but I also have that need for approval and ambition. So I don't know if it's a birth order thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's always the story or how I've made meaning of it, but you're right. It could be just that's how I make meaning of it.
And I recall that story. I think, was that story, and you talked a little bit about that in the first book.
Yeah, in Dare Dream Do. Yeah, I did.
Awesome. I love this question. I think it's going to be the last one I take. It came from Rebecca. And one of the reasons I want to ask Rebecca's question is I do work with some young women in my office who are just starting their career, and I overheard them this morning talking about another colleague who had, a gazillion endorsements for a skill on LinkedIn, and were questioning, how do I get endorsements for my skills? So Rebecca asks the question, if you're a young professional and still discovering what your career could be, what are some of your top insights for applying distinctive strengths to shaping a career path?
Okay, so I would say, yeah, the first question is assuming that you know what your strengths are, because you may not. I mean, you may have some sense of it from college. So Rebecca, I would actually take a further step back, and I would say to you, at the beginning of your career, you're at the low end of the curve of your career, and you want to accelerate into hypergrowth. And the best way that you can accelerate into hypergrowth is to have a lot of resources available to you to do that over time. And so my best advice to you is, while you don't yet know what your strengths are, is to, if you've got 3 opportunities in front of you, look at what jobs will be available to you if you do a good job in door number 2, door number 1, door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. And whichever door will open more doors afterwards, that's the job you want to take, because you'll develop skills in the process. You don't know what they are yet. So just put yourself into a context that will push you as much as possible, so that when you're finished, you'll have the cachet and the skills that you need to go on to do something even better after that.
Got it. That's very helpful. And I'll share that with my colleagues here as well.
Okay,
Whitney,
good.
thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day during a busy launch week.
Thank you.
And so lots of people are putting their thank yous in. Yes, there will be recording available. Yes, we will have a selection
Okay.
of slides that we'll send as a PDF. I will send out that follow-up material today. But I want, before we wrap this call, the best way you can help Whitney celebrate her book launch this week is to go to your favorite online bookseller and buy the book. And if you have friends or colleagues who could benefit from this content, share the recording, buy them a book. And also, if you've already read Disrupt Yourself, I would encourage you, please, as soon as possible, to go and leave a review on Amazon. It's a very helpful thing to do for an author. Only a few sentences, take 5 minutes, as a way to say thank you to Whitney for sharing her expertise with us. Amazon reviews, always appreciated. Sorry, Whitney, I can't resist.
Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today. And I encourage all of you, as Whitney has challenged us to do, to always be willing to disrupt ourselves.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for coming. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I know some of you have some amazing stories, and so I would love to hear more of them. As Becky may have mentioned, I'm on Twitter at Johnson Whitney. You can always email me at whitney@whitneyjohnson.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you for all the support that you've given for the book. It's really been wonderful and fantastic and exciting, and I'm really, really appreciative.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.